So this is my dad's workshop. It's an all wooden building on wooden posts, and it's heated by a wood stove, which is also very useful for scrap disposal. And to get the heat around the building a little bit more, my dad's always used a little fan to just circulate air around that stove. So back here, my dad's also got his old drill press and a lot of the metal tools and the welder. And then moving over here, a small bandsaw and the main tool of the shop, a Felder table saw. I think I'm going to make a separate video about this saw, so I won't talk too much about that. Now back here we've got the main working area, assembly area. So this is the workbench where most of the assembly took place. It's a fairly low workbench because my dad was a fairly short guy, so he liked to have the work a little bit lower. And back here, a drill press, that was a recent addition. I actually bought that at a yard sale, and my dad confiscated it. Strip sander, grinder, the router stuff, all the screwdrivers, a miter trimmer. That's a rare tool. You don't see that too many these days because with miter saws, you don't really need them anymore. But my dad never believed in miter saws. Here we've got the lathe. My dad actually used that quite a lot because any sort of spindles or knobs for drawers or little doors, he'd always turn those on here himself. And he got quite fast at it. He never believed in copy lathes or anything like that because he could work much faster himself. And you still have to stand there with a copy lathe. And here we've got an 18-inch bandsaw. This isn't a very good bandsaw. I've tried tweaking it, but I could build a better one myself. My dad always called this bandsaw his tractor because it could cut big things, but never very accurately. So back here, we've got a machine. You don't see that many of these days. This is a stroke sander. Basically, he used it where people nowadays use thickness sanders. And with this long belt running, just with a pad pushing on here and moving this in and out to finish panels and stuff like that. The problem with a sander like this is there's really not a very good way to catch the dust. Although that wasn't the problem for my dad because he didn't believe in dust collection, and there was a huge amount of dust all over the shop, and especially here because this was the biggest source of fine dust in the whole shop. Back here we have another sander. This is an edge sander, and actually I always enjoyed using that sander the most just for rounding edges and stuff like that. It's very easy to see what you're doing while it's running. And as far as I'm concerned, sanders are always pretty safe. The worst you can always get is scuffed up knuckles. Now here we have the jointer, a 12-inch Poitras jointer. This jointer is quite the heavy beast. It's got a really big 5-inch cutter head, 12-inch wide cut, but the tables are actually a bit wider. All cast iron, and even the base is made out of cast iron. And a big honking motor inside, so quite the heavy beast. Good for cutting big stuff, although since I've got my own shop with a jointer with a much smaller cutter head, this jointer is not very good at cutting small stuff. Not safe at that. So a big tool isn't always better. If this was my shop, I would add a 6-inch jointer right next to it just for small stuff. Now here we've got a thickness planer. This is a 20-inch thickness planer. It's a Taiwanese planer, clone of some American machine, because I've seen American machines advertised that look just like that machine. Very handy to have one that's 20 inches wide, but just like the jointer, for small stuff it's not ideal, especially because it's got bed rollers. So there's quite a lot of snipe on this machine. I might make another video on that machine as well. Now back here, we've got the radial arm saw, Sears Craftsman saw. This one has actually got an induction motor, which is nice in that it runs quieter, but it's liable to overheat if you cut a lot with it. People don't use radial arm saws very much anymore. My dad mostly just used it for sizing up lumber. It's not really precise enough for final cuts. When my dad built this shop, this saw is actually mounted at a slight angle. And I found that the saw would have a tendency to wander forward on its own, especially as the bearings on it were still new. And I thought that was maybe an accident waiting to happen, so I jury-rigged this up, where I put a string on here, and that goes down to a weight down here, so as you pull the saw, the weight goes up so that it doesn't come forward on its own, and that seems to have lasted all these 26 years. And there hasn't been any accidents with the saw, so maybe it did the job. Back here we've got a lot of scrap wood. My dad was always saving scrap wood and then trying to use the piece of wood that was just the right size. So there's lots of offcuts left over that are still good for smaller projects. In later years, he got a little bit more about saving stuff, so every small scrap of plywood he would save. And I've just recently, this whole shelf was full of offcuts that were too small to make anything. So I've just recently turned all those into firewood, and these are the offcuts that are left over that were large enough to still make stuff out of. Here we've got my dad's homemade table saw. This was more of an experiment using parts that were left over from when the Felder got repaired, because it was a new design when it came out, and both the saw arbor and the sliding table had to be replaced. So these are actually made of the old parts. And he's got a 3 horsepower motor on here. The catch with the saw is he can't adjust the depth of cut. He didn't really use it very much after he built it. If you wanted to know more about this saw, I actually made a video about that one 2 years ago. So that kind of takes us full circle. So here we're back at the wood stove again. And here is the door to what used to be the finishing room, because my dad, of course, always made a lot of dust, especially with no dust collection system. My mom would do all the varnishing, and that happened in here where there was electric heat because it's away from the wood stove and it's away from the dust. Right now it's just a junk storage room. In fact, I moved a lot of the junk that accumulated here into there just to make this video. Getting the workshop really warm has always been a bit of a problem, but when you're working, you don't need it that warm. But it turns out the glue, you need the temperature quite warm, and so my dad actually made this bench which has unequal length legs because it sits half on the concrete pad. And the purpose of this bench is to put the wood that he's about to glue and that he has glued up near the wood stove to keep it warm. So having a bench near the wood stove kind of solved that problem.